Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Brotherhood of the Weird Carabiner. This is a trail life podcast where we'll be working on talking about trail life principles in everyday life, exploring stories that we have, and converting them into worthwhile knowledge. Welcome to the podcast. This is the very first episode. I have a guest on the show right now. I'll get to him in a minute, but I just want to explain how this podcast is going to work. Well, we've got stories. In the future, there'll be a bunch of stories. Right now, we've just got two stories. I'll tell one, and my guest will tell one. And great transition. Welcome, everybody, my special guest, Matthew Rabbits.
Thank you very much.
Matthew, were you in the same troop as me?
I think so.
Yes. What was the last event you went on?
The lock-in in December.
Okay, the lock-in in December. Why have you not gone on any others?
I'm no longer a youth.
Oh, you're 18? Oh, I didn't notice. Welcome to the show, Matthew Rabbits. This will be the first episode. How do you feel being on the very first episode of my podcast?
It's a real honor.
All right, cool. Well, without any further ado, let's get into these stories. I've got mine first, and then Matthew will share his in just a minute. So my story, it begins at Trail Life, of course. All these stories involve Trail Life. We are at the Fire Summit. If you don't know what a Fire Summit is, this is where you're at Trail Life as a group, and you stay up all night building fires. Sounds terrible, right? It is. I hate it. Anyway, there's one catch that makes it infinitely worse. You have to go the whole night without talking. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. It's something that the first officer wanted to do at the time, and me not being the first officer couldn't say anything, so we had to stay up all night without being able to talk. We had almost finished it. I actually had enjoyed it up to that point. I was sitting there. It was light out, so you could see stuff. It was no longer night. It was in the morning, and we were cooking breakfast. I had my pot that I had bought the night before so that I could cook some eggs in it over the fire because we had to cook over our fires. And I had this stick that I found, and I was scrambling my eggs. It was working out all right. It was kind of hot, but what's trail life without some hurt? And then along came this one guy. He walked up to me, and I was just like, what's this guy want? And he showed me this frying pan full of eggs. And the eggs were his, and he had scrambled them up to look really nice, and there were also sausages there that weren't singed or burnt too bad on one side. It was a very nice breakfast. I thought in my head, why is this guy showing this stuff off to me? But he was a friend of mine, and so I just kind of gasped out, how'd you do that? But it wasn't in any sort of language. I just kind of breathed it out and thought that. And then he looked at me, and then he sort of gasped out and breathed the same thing. And he said, I don't really know. And from that point on, I always thought about that event and how well we were able to communicate, me and that friend of mine, by not even talking, just gasping. All right, that's the end of my story. It doesn't make much sense. It just meant a lot to me. Now, Matthew Rabbits, would you like to say your story?
Okay, my story is this. I too was at this fire summit. I brought a frying pan and a spatula because I was prepared like that. And I was cooking my eggs and doing pretty good. And I look over at this other guy a couple fires down, and I see this guy kind of kneeling next to his fire with smoke blowing up into his face and ash everywhere, just kind of poking his eggs with a stick. And I felt kind of bad for him because, nobody wants to poke their eggs with a stick, right? So I'm like, okay, I'll give him some of my eggs. So I walk down the row of fires and finally get to him and hold my eggs out in front of his face. He looks at him and then looks at me and kind of shrugs and grunts and exhales and all sorts of things. And I look back at him, kind of shrug. I just walk off because I think he must not want my eggs. Maybe he doesn't like well-cooked eggs. So I just go off and eat them by myself.
But the thing is, the helpless person who just said that he didn't want his eggs was me. And the person who showed off his masterfully cooked eggs to me was Matthew. Surprise! Yep, you definitely didn't see that coming. You didn't realize this, but Matthew is actually a really good friend of mine. And for the longest time, I was thinking about that moment of the story I just told you, where I wondered how we were able to communicate so well using only grunts and gasps. Eventually, I asked him, and the story he told me was basically the one he'd said to you. I thought it was hilarious. We both saw this as two different things happening. I saw it as Matthew showing off his eggs to me, and you, Matthew, saw it as me suffering and dismissing your help. We both took it then in two different directions. Me thinking how we were able to communicate with grunts, and Matthew?
I just kind of thought you didn't want my eggs.
There we go. Two different things happened here with two misunderstood outcomes. It was our differing points of view that caused us to think of the occurring events differently. We experienced each event through our own perspectives. Let's put this into an everyday experience. Look at yourself, for example. Suppose you're with your friends and you're all just joking around, and in your specific jokes, you either say something you didn't mean or something you didn't think offensive, but you ended up offending someone by accident. It is your fault because they felt hurt of what you did. From your perspective, you didn't think that they would feel offended. However, from their perspective, they took it as an insult. The moral behind this is think before you talk. Think before you talk. There are actually several Bible verses about this. One of them's in Proverbs, I think. It's mention one.
Proverbs 16:23 about intelligent people thinking before they speak,
Yeah, well,
and some things along those lines.
is that a paraphrase, or does it actually say that?
That's paraphrase.
Okay. But yeah, basically, the Bible tells you to think before you talk. Put yourself in their shoes. So while you're thinking before you talk, look at yourself in that person's perspective. If this person that's talking to you were to say something, would that offend you? Now, let's turn this whole thing around. Suppose someone does offend you. You know, I hate that person, right? You don't have to, and as a matter of fact, you shouldn't. Here are some things that could help you master taking offense, and it all involves perspective.
There's actually a Bible verse about that too.
Do you have one?
Yes, I do.
Say it.
James 1:19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Don't become angry too quick. Think about it.
Yeah. So this again pulls you back. Thinking before you either talk or get angry. You think and you put yourself in their shoes. Did this person really target you to offend you? They may not have been actually targeting you in particular. They could have just been saying a joke, like what you would have done earlier. Their intent may not have been as malicious as you originally thought. Generally, I can't say this with all circumstances, but specifically, if you're with a group of good friends of yours, if someone makes a joke, they're not meaning to get you out on it. It's just a joke. Here's one last way to look at it. Say you're joining trail life and this is your very first day. You come up to some people and you meet them and you're in a circle just talking to them. One of them makes a joke about you and it feels a little offensive. Your first thought shouldn't be to take offense, but to just step back and think about it, put yourself in their shoes, and then perhaps consider that this person who's at trail life, which should normally consist of nice-mannered people, they see you as a friend that can take a joke. They've already welcomed you into the troop. All these thoughts have come together from trail life. What a great place. The Fire Summit, which I hate, taught us all this valuable lesson. Matthew, you got any thoughts on that?
I just thought I was coming to talk about eggs, to be honest.
You thought this was only going to be about eggs, but it turns out you're wrong. This has a whole lot of more deeper meaning than that. This is one of the reasons why I feel like trail life is really great. A lot greater than most people come to see or think it is. That is the main lesson I want to get out of this first episode. Trail life, however bored you might have been at the meetings you came to, going to the actual events, you or your son could learn some really nice lifelong knowledge that'll benefit them in the field later. It benefited me, it's benefited Matthew. Trail life's great. I personally believe this could be a really good podcast. Which brings me to you, the listener. One thing I have no idea about is your thoughts on this podcast.
Your perspective.
I just want to let you know that if you hated it, that it's the worst thing that you ever heard, that was never our intent. We meant for it to be the best podcast ever. However, suppose you actually love the podcast. We appreciate that. That was our intention. And so, since we have such a good understanding, why don't you tune in next time for another great episode?
Yeah.
Yeah, Matthew very well might actually be there. Matthew, take us away with your signature catchphrase.
See you later.
All right. Thanks for listening.